Welcome to the Malcolm Roberts Show. Our aims are to restore our country and our planet for humans to flourish. This is Senator Malcolm Roberts in the state of Queensland, Australia. Thank you for having me as your guest, whether it's in your car, your kitchen, your shed, your lounge, your barbecue, or wherever you are right now, sitting, standing, driving, walking, running, laying down, exercising, or whatever you're doing right now. Today we're going to reveal opportunities on our doorstep here in Queensland that may surprise you, may delight you, may annoy you. Well, the opportunities won't, but the frustration of the opportunities may anger you. They're eye-opening and the possibilities are unlimited for our whole state and for the country. And we'll also discuss with a special guest what we need to do to grab these opportunities for regional production and wealth, and for our whole state and nation, and for governance, integrity, leadership, truth, respect, and security for our country. And we're going to have some fun with someone who can be very colourful and at times humorous, and very refreshingly forthright and blunt. Before we start, our show's two themes are, first of all, freedom. Specifically, freedom replacing control, the eternal human struggle between control and freedom. And secondly, responsibility, specifically personal responsibility and integrity. History repeatedly proves that both freedom and responsibility are essential for human progress and people's livelihoods. Human history, when we look beyond the few villains and exploiters that get publicity, we see a wonderfully positive story about humans. I'm not suggesting we ignore the villains and exploiters, nor the pain they wreak, yet look into them and beyond them to understand the bigger picture in human evolution and progress, and to realize the best species on this planet is the human species, and to really take pride and enjoy being human. Last week, I was invited recently to speak at the Marine Therapy Group on the Gold Coast. Now, we'll talk more about marine therapy in a minute and who needs it, but Marine Therapy Group on the Gold Coast, a lively group of patriotic Aussies and a few sprinklings of other nationalities who meet weekly to get together. And every month or so, they have an external speaker to come in just to keep them up positive and make sure that they don't dwell on whinging, as some groups can tend to. So it's a wonderfully positive group with some outspoken people in it, I can tell you. And the organiser is Stюart Ballantайн, a Scotsman and an Aussie, a very, very proud Aussie. So welcome, Stewart, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Malcolm. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, you're a bit of a media celebrity at times. Not a media tart like Peter Beattie, but media celebrity. So we'll honour that and welcome you very much. You're also on TNT Radio, aren't you?
Yes, I was on there 2 days ago, actually. So again, giving some commentary and some feedback.
So let's start. Yeah, let's start at the start. What's your background? Where were you born, and what were your early years?
I was born on the west coast of Scotland, a little place called Helensburgh, sheep stealing area. I came to Australia when I was 14 I was number 3 of 6 kids in a migrant family, Scottish migrant family. Number 3 is great because they can never remember your name. It's really good. So at 16,
so you got away with a fair bit from.
Well, at 16, I disappeared to sea for 7 years. I don't think they noticed I was gone until I returned back at 23. So I was a navigator on passenger cargo ships, and then I went back to Scotland to study naval architecture. People say, well, why did you go back to Scotland to study naval architecture? You can study it in Sydney or Tasmania. I said, listen, the women in Scotland are fiercely overdressed, and there's no distractions from studying. So
I can imagine. Yeah. And did you marry a Scotswoman or an Aussie?
Oh, well, no, actually, I married an English woman because they're social climbers. And they like to marry up.
So your wife wanted to marry up. So Scotland's also got a very proud history of maritime history, hasn't it? And where were the major ships built? The Queen Elizabeth and so on, Northern England. near Scotland?
No, they were all built in Scotland. The Queens were
Ah,
all built in Scotland. On the River Clyde, we used to have 36 shipyards there, and now there's only one. So they didn't reinvest in covering the shipyards, and the weather in Scotland is not conducive to open air shipbuilding.
so I'll ask
Um,
you later some more about that. But what made you go to sea? What was in you from an early childhood that made you go to sea?
well, I think I tell people that the town I came from in Scotland for 3 years in a row, nobody won the beauty competition. So I thought I'd go to sea and find some stunning woman offshore. But no, this it was just in my DNA. It wasn't in my family, but it was. I just loved ships. I was mesmerized by ships, so I just wanted to go to sea. And so off I went. Luckily, when I joined a ship in Melbourne when I was 16. Actually, it was Geelong, but at the time, there was 125 ships on the Australian coast. Now there's only 11. So that's another tragic scenario. I keep pushing hard for a coastal roll-on, roll-off ships to get trucks off the road.
Well, we'll talk about
Well,
that. That's one of the things that I learnt from you last week. But it's also something that's been bothering me for some time. What happened to that coastal shipping here? Well, we'll talk more about it later. But and also why it disappeared and what were the problems associated with that? Because it wasn't all beer and skittles. So, when did you arrive in Australia? How old were you again?
I was 14. I was at the early 60s when I arrived. So, and the place was good. The Scottish education system was such that I coasted for 2 years when I arrived here because, I was so far in front of the class that they put me in, the same age. So I coasted and I became lazy. So,
Well,
and they went to sea and they pulled that out of me, my laziness.
when I finished my talk and listening to the MTG group, Marine Therapy Group, we went upstairs to one of your offices. You have three offices, right, with your
Yes,
businesses,
that's correct.
right?
Yes,
And
that's
they're all in the
correct.
Gold Coast area.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, um, and I was just wondering. You have very strong work ethic, very strong sense of humour. Um, you're Scottish by nature, and that's a wonderful compliment. And your staff were saying that you're a very hard worker and you'll never retire. What gave you these things in early childhood years? It's usually the formative years that are critical. What stood out for you in your early formative years?
I think of work ethic. It was quite interesting because when I was nearly 11, my mother came to me and looked at me so closely. I thought she was examining my teeth. She said, you're old enough. You need to work now and contribute to the family well-being." And I thought she'd been possessed by an evil spirit because she couldn't remember my name or my age. She thought I was 12, or wasn't even 11. She said, "So I need to take you down to the greengrocer's place." So she wheeled me down there and says, "This is your new delivery boy." And he will take that massive bicycle with a massive big basket in the front full of shopping to various places around the town. And the greengrocer said, "He's awful wee." She said, "Yes, but he's smarter than he looks." And of course, she was one of the biggest customers, having a big family. So he said, "Oh, I'll give him a try," but I couldn't ride that bike uh, when it was full. I had to just walk it. And within 2 weeks, I had a work ethic. I had a work ethic.
So, was
And
your mother's trip to the greengrocer? Was it as much of a surprise to the greengrocer as it was to you? It sounds like it
yes,
was.
absolutely, absolutely. I didn't realize I was, not even 11. And but it's funny because I speak to a lot of guys of my vintage, and this is usually a fairly simple and similar arrangement. There was no discussion. You just had to go and actually help the family, whether it was on a farm or on a workshop or anything. You just had to help and dig in. And if I had asked for a gap year, my dad would have knocked my tooth out. And so, well,
Well, I know in our family, we had certain jobs we must do around the house, and we had to do them. Took it in turns with brother and sister, and then we had other jobs at which we could make money because we lived out in the bush, and it was difficult to get into town. Although I could
right.
cycle in. So, what developed your interest in ships again?
Well, it was, I was living on a river with all these shipyards, and almost 90% of the population worked for the shipyards. The other 10% worked for whiskey distilleries and bit of administration and stuff like that. So it was just it was a tough area. People, as Billy Connolly would say, they would bash you up for a bag of fish and chips. So, and there was a Catholic side of town and a Protestant side of town. And so when I came to Australia and all of a sudden the smog and the rain and everything else had been replaced with blue skies, I thought, this is terrific. This is just terrific. So, but I still wanted to go to sea.
Right. So your main excuse me. What are your main interests now? The ships and ports, developing Australia, restoring sound governance, and you've been, and for the audience, Stuart's not only been an outstanding business person, he's also been an outstanding citizen in raising some of the issues. You've actually stood for election because you're concerned about the deterioration in Australia and you want to take hold of that. So, what are your
That's
main
correct.
interests?
Yes. Well, I stood for the Gold Coast as uh, when Campbell Newman called that election, that snap election in 2015, and it was a 3 week election period. And I thought, well, 3 weeks, and I was dealing with Asia, and Asia was closed down for the Chinese New Year. So I thought, oh, I'm not doing too much for the next 3 weeks. I'll go and stand for politics. And so I spent a month on uh, what do we call them, the signs and
Core
bits and
flutes.
pieces, core flutes everywhere, and a bit of advertising. Went round to speak to all of because I was campaigning for small business, and I believe that small business is the biggest voting bloc
Yeah.
in the country. There's 5.5 million of people like me who are mainly sensible when you don't actually become aware of anything until you run your own business.
Yep.
Until I started my own business when I was 29, I was apolitical. I was not interested in politics at all. But once I started my own business, I started listening to these guys and paying attention because actually their decisions affected me. And
Right.
most, so that's why I keep saying to shall we say, the right wing bold politician, you have to focus on small business because that is the largest voting bloc. And the MTG, really, when we put these YouTubes out, we say this is the national think tank for small business because most of the people in the MTG were actually ran their own business, and some of them still do.
Well,
So,
it's
and I think that
very
that's very
refreshing.
important.
Very refreshing the interaction with the people in the room last Wednesday at MTG. Very engaged
Yes,
people, very forthright, very strong in their opinions, but also willing to listen. So,
yes,
I was impressed with that group, and most of them were retired. Correct?
uh, yes. Well, sort of semi-retired, like my German friend Horst. He says he's retired, but he's a bit like me. I'm supposed to be semi-retired, but I've cut my hours down to 96 hours a week, and there's no such thing as retirement. The guys that we notice that do retire and do put their feet up, usually within 2 years they've got a serious illness, and between another 2 years later they're gone. So I think one of the key issues of keeping a healthy life is keeping an active life, mentally and physically.
Yep. And you've tangled with politicians. You've interacted with politicians pleasantly as well as strongly. Um, you've given MPs and journalists seminars. You've done quite a lot of work on the side outside of your commercial activities.
Yes, yes. I've had to separate it, Malcolm, because I couldn't make statements on behalf of Sea Transport because I did a couple of times. I had an issue with Mr. Joyce, Alan Joyce of Qantas, when he was promoting the same-sex marriage, I wrote a letter an open letter to the Qantas board, and pointed out that this CEO of theirs what he was doing was dangerous and unnecessary. And at the same time, he had taken Qantas from number 2 down to number 23 in the world, and it was no longer safe, and he was sweating the assets. I mean, I was a big traveler. I still am a big traveler, but not with Qantas solely now. And so my letter then was published as the number 1 letter at the Weekend Australia. Then, and I banned Qantas. I banned all my people from traveling Qantas because he banned a pie man who stuck a pie in his face at a breakfast speech in Western Australia. And this 67-year-old guy stuck a pie in his face because he was taking a strong stand for same-sex marriage. Anyway, so Alan Joyce banned this guy from traveling Qantas. So I banned Qantas. I banned my people from traveling Qantas. Then Margaret Court actually picked that up. And she then joined the fray and said, well, I'm banning Qantas. And of course, immediately the media jumped all over Margaret Court, as they recently did with Barry Humphries, and will take his name off take her name off the Margaret Court Stadium, as they did with Barry Humphries. Will take his name off of the Melbourne Comedy Festival. That's what they do. They try to cancel you. And the good thing about the MTG, it doesn't exist, so we can't cancel it.
Well, I can testify that it exists, but I know what you mean. It's below the radar. So
yes.
Before we get into the main topics I want to explore with you, Stewart, tell us something you appreciate, anything at all.
I appreciate boldness. I was brought up in a place where you just had to deal with the truth. I then went to sea for 7 years, and when I changed watch at midnight or 4 a.m. in the morning, I would do a 10-minute handover. Everything was the truth. The water is such and such, the speed is such, and the wind, there's a ship here, here, and here. Everything had to be exactly the truth. And it's only when I came ashore and I started dealing with politicians and bureaucrats, truth is a rare commodity. And so I always like to deal with the truth. And when I write some of these columns and put a bold headline, you'll see some of them in The Spectator, defending Australia from itself. Because at the moment, if there was a gold medal or silver medal for stupidity, we would win gold, silver, and bronze as the way we're going as a nation. It is just terrible. And is it good for the nation? It's not. So I either get... I usually do a column, and then I'm doing the YouTubes, but I get the MTG guys, they all chip in because they agree with me. So instead of being a coffee group sitting whinging about the state of the nation, we actually do something about it. And you've seen some of our videos.
Yes, excellent.
They're humorous. We like to introduce with a little bit of humor, then smack it with a serious message. And then exit with a bit of humor, such as the amnesia plug-a-duck. We did a little thing called brain fart instead of Braveheart, about how she was cutting the people coming across the border. And we took the footage from Braveheart, and where they were talking about keeping the English south of the border, if you've seen the movie Braveheart. So we did a snip out of that, but put Anastasia Palaszczuk's face on it. A Scottish lady friend of mine was her voice, and we have to keep these evil, infected people south of the border, because if they get across the border, do you realize hundreds of thousands of them, infected people with this COVID, could infect our state of Queensland? And do you realize then how hard it would be to get a cafe, a latte at a coffee shop in Hastings Street in Noosa if they all came over the border? We've got to keep them away from. So it was a piece of nonsense, but actually it was quite pointed. And we got 10 or 12,000 hits on that straight away.
Well, I
people
can
say, well,
recommend your videos. We've watched a couple of them, and you've got quite a suite. But we'll just park it for now. With regard to, you've written 18 articles on Spectator magazine about Australia
yes,
and about transport. So let's come back to that. What I want to discuss now, if you could please, is the main guts that will excite people. I think your sea transport business, the three arms of that, and the innovations, and particularly if you can lead us into mini ports, or what, mini ramps as they're called nowadays, and the significance of that, because I went down with one of my parliamentary advisors and I was blown away. Very, very simple. And then the enthusiasm of your staff in the room, and just for the concept. And my parliamentary advisor and I looked at each other and just went, wow, this would be phenomenal for Queensland. So take us there, please.
all right, okay. Well, what's happened in this country, if people haven't noticed, is that the Greens have locked up the whole coast. There are reams and reams of rules and regulation. You can't even put a pile in the water. And we used to run the ferry from Toondah Harbour and near Cleveland, here in Brisbane, across to Stradbroke. And we could not get a permit for dredging. And so everything was green rules and regulations. So we developed a concept some time ago. We're taking a mini port. In other words, taking the port to the product, not taking the product to the port. We set up a port for MacArthur River mining 30 years ago, called Bing Bong in the
Up
Gulf
in the
of
Gulf.
Carpentaria,
Yeah.
up in the Gulf, yes. And that exports lead zinc. It has exported over $12 billion of lead zinc, and to which governments have received about 750 million of royalties. And the Aboriginal Mawa group is actually a shareholder in the ship. And we actually pieced that all together. We were the strategist, if you like, 30 years ago. And that was the first one. Works very successful. And this is, we're talking a marina, a port there, a mini port that's about a third of the size of Runaway Bay Marina. This is a dinky toy place. So a small place like that with one vessel generating such huge export funding and royalties. So we actually did lots and lots of studies, which I showed you some of them, for all the way around Queensland. And I went to Campbell Newman when he was the Premier, and I said, look, we're on this concept of putting mini ports right around the coast so that we take the port to the product. And in Queensland, in North Queensland, there are so many trapped resources, such as we've got 1.5 billion tons of phosphate way down south of the Gregory Downs. But we can't get in there now because 150 or 160 years ago, when every country in the world was putting canals inland, Russia, China, Canada, the whole lot. And it's the cheapest way to transport goods. We only did one in Australia. That was the Murray River, which is navigable for 970 kilometers. And it goes to a height of 36 meters above sea level. The trouble was that they never engineered the entrance as they did in Victoria. In the biggest lake system, they engineered the lake's entrance, which is now a big port, services the offshore oil industry, et cetera, et cetera. So, but in the Murray, they never engineered the entrance. But nowhere else in the country did they put a canal, which they should have done. And Bob Catter was the only guy saying, we should put these canals. So we actually did a study for the Queensland government about 12 years ago. And it's very cheap to put a canal through soft country like south of the Gulf of Carpentaria. And we can get those commodities out at a good price. At the moment, we can't access all of those products and the mineral products without exceeding the cost of selling it. So, in other words, if we dig it out of the ground, stick it on a truck, take it to Mount Isa, put it on a train, and take it to Townsville, we can't do that for a cost less than, and we can sell it. So it's economically, these things are economically transported. So we said, okay, if we put these
So
tiny
you've created jobs and enabled them to continue in this country.
That's correct.
and
That's
earn
correct.
valuable income. Is it fair to say that MacArthur River would not have started without this,
Oh,
or without
absolutely.
your? Okay, so
That's
what you've done, you've taken a fairly remote area and a magnificent mine, which is similar. And people might not be aware of this, but there's a strong connection between the MacArthur River mine in the Gulf, Mount Isa, and Broken Hill, and Mount Broken Hill has very coarse crystals of silver, lead, and zinc. Mount Isa has finer particles, but still fairly coarse, and that's what makes it easier to separate. But MacArthur River required some new technology with regard to separating because they're very fine particles. But in addition, they're far from infrastructure. So without your ship, MacArthur River would not have started. And you've just explained to us those figures. I did a rough calculation. $400 million a year in revenue and
yes.
Substantial royalties to the state over the past 30 years, and substantial royalties to the Aboriginal community, who are part owners. I mean,
That's
this is phenomenal, and it would have only have happened because your concept of a barge. So basically, what you do is you build a port, and then you people might not know this, but the Gulf has very shallow. So you build a port which is not extensive. It's just a mini port, big enough for your ship, the barge, and the barge takes the product from the mine out to one of the international carriers, transloads into an international ship, and takes it to the final destination. Is that about summarizing it?
That's correct. And we're doing a new one now at the moment, which I showed you the other day. It carries 17,000 tons and it discharges at 7,000 tons an hour. This would be bauxite. We're doing 3 or 4 projects in the west for wheat and minerals. South Australia, we established a grain port at Lucky Bay, and we were the founding shareholder of that one. And there's now a second port at Wallaroo exporting grain. So the farmers then get $30 more money at the farm gate per ton. So for 2 million tons coming out of the area, the farm does another $60 million into the local economy.
So let's test my understanding then. Rather than trucking wool, wheat, minerals, energy products, extensive distances to a major port like Townsville or Newcastle or Sydney or Brisbane or Gladstone, you can build a port fairly close to the actual production centre. You
Yes,
save the farmers the transport cost to the major port, so they can save
yes,
$20 to $40 a ton for their product, which gives them
that's
greater
correct.
revenue, which means more local money. It also creates a small port in the area. It also
Yes,
takes marginal farming, marginal mineral production, marginal manufacturing, and makes it very robust and strong because you reduce the transport costs. What was the other one I was just thinking of in there? Yeah,
well,
you create greater access to the regions and greater jobs in the regions.
and particularly the indigenous, we work very closely with DAA, which was the Department of Aboriginal Affairs before they became ATSIC. I was consulting for them for probably the best part of 25 years. Just they were one of our clients, and one of the things with the Aboriginal youth, they're terrific with boats and shipping. So we
They're
had
terrific,
suggested,
full
oh,
stop.
these yes. I mean, but they it's like kids. Kids are always good with boats. I find that in my industry, we take the enthusiastic ones and we bring them here to our design office. So, but when I spoke with Noel Pearson and Richie Arnett, I said, well, look, we need these mini ports. But of course, unfortunately, the Palaszczuk government decided that this was evil. So they introduced a Sustainable Ports Act, which meant that no one could put any of these mini ports anywhere in Queensland, which was, to me, was a piece of nonsense because it constrains regional growth, it constrains exports, it constrains the royalties, Aboriginal training, regional prosperity.
Well,
And
correct me if I'm wrong, but one of your senior management, Roshan, I think it was, said that that Sustainable Ports Act was 645 pages in length, and it was designed to stop you making regional ports. That's it.
that's correct. That's
And
correct.
so 645 pages to get in the way of you creating regional Australian jobs.
That's correct. And just before Palaszczuk was
Isn't
elected,
isn't the government
just
supposed to
before
be
she,
working for you, not against you?
well, they're supposed to be, yes. But just before she was elected, the 7:30 report ran a thing on transshipping. It ran a 1 hour thing on
Or
just a program
a
on
ship's male and
transshipping.
female now too, are they?
Yes,
Transshipping?
that's right. Yeah, yes, that's right. So in other words, taking the from a very shallow port as we do with Bing Bong and MacArthur River and Karumba, the whole idea is we take from these shallow draft multi-screw vessels, we'll take it out to the ship at anchors, as just mentioned before. But the 7:30 report did a show on transshipping, and they crafted it in a way, and they showed Kalimantan in Indonesia that has a very crude and way of just cranes, and they're dropping coal and everything in the water. And they showed this and alluded to the fact that this was happening in the Barrier Reef. So the minute that Palaszczuk got in, which was only a few days later, she said there will be no transshipping in Queensland. I wrote her an email, stinging email, said, listen, if you actually look out your window, and there are two very successful transshipping operations in the Gulf of Carpentaria, which have already received international environmental awards because the dust proof, they're done on a negative pressure shed, which we showed you in the model, so that none of the dust actually escapes from the vessel. So, but no, she didn't. No, we're going ahead and we're making this an act. And they sent two directors down to sit with Roshan and I and tell us how we were doing these evil things and we were going to destroy the planet. This was the green mantra. It was just nonsense.
And the problem with the Labor Party in Queensland, one of the many problems with the Labor Party in Queensland, and to some extent the Liberal Nationals, is that they kowtow to the Greens because they don't want to lose the Greens' preferences. Because the Labor Party would not be in power but for Greens' preferences. And I shouldn't say Greens' preferences, the preferences of the Greens voters, because the Greens hand out how to vote tickets. The parties don't own preferences except in Victoria, but in Queensland it's the voters who allocate preferences, but the Greens and parties influence those preferences, and Queensland would not have a Labor government if it wasn't for Greens preferences, Green voters' preferences. So it's very important to understand that the Labor Party is driven by a machine that must stay in government. It takes in millions of dollars in election donations, largely from union bosses and other sources, but it requires to be in an alliance with the Greens that they don't talk about but is real. So the Greens have got an ideological bent about what you're doing, Stewart, and they won't let you, as you said, no pylons, no dredging. And so what they'd rather see is a massive impact at a massive port, or maybe I'm wrong, what they would like to see is shut down all of our industry.
That's the one, because even the massive ports, as the video I showed you about the mini ports here, with the big ports, they've passed a law now, a green law, that you must put a bond down if you're going to build a jetty out to export whatever. You must place the bond to remove the jetty at the end of the mine life. So if it's a 30-year mine life, the cost today of putting a bond to take it out in 30 years' time when the piles are all rusted or whatever, it's a significant cost. And that, of course, takes out most medium-sized businesses. It only leaves, the BHPs and the Rio Tintos that are capable of funding $1 billion structure and a bond to remove it in 30 years' time. Whereas we've been saying, well, okay, let's just do a mini port, bring it in, dig it out, and at the end of the time, you say to the indigenous or the landowners, say, look, the mine's finished. Do you guys want us to fill this in, or would you want to keep it as a boat harbor or a marina? Oh, and of course, they would say, yeah, we'll keep it as a marina. So that it was a nice strategy. It was a multi-user, so it wasn't eligible to become a victim of a monopoly. The West Australians liked the model because in Western Australia, the ugly, what I call the ugly sisters, the mining, the big ugly ones, they would totally block the port so that no medium-sized or small exporter could actually get access to the port.
So you're
So
perpetuating a cabal in
that,
each industry.
that's correct. So with the mini ports, we say, well, okay, there's three areas here. They're all 50 hectares, 50 hectares, 50 hectares. So there's three independent users of this mini port. It's a common user port. It's like an airport. Any plane can land there.
You know,
And
when you
now that
first mentioned, oh, sorry.
So when we spoke to the Army, who have been speaking to us about the amphibious landing craft, they said, we can't find places to put these things in the north. And of course, as you know, that Cape York and the Torres Strait is the area of the highest incursion of border incursions. You know, we're talking 4,500 border incursions every year
Yeah.
through the Torres Strait. Now, when you say, well, okay, where can we put the patrol boats up here? If you had some of these mini ports, of course you could put them in there. Most of the vessels that we're talking about to the Navy is around about 70 to 80 meters long. And 80% of all of the RAN vessels are actually under 80 meters.
So that would be marvelous, because instead of spending a lot of time for the vessel to go back to a home port somewhere and come back out and do its surveillance, it could just go from one port to a next port and make each port the home for its surveillance for a short period.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
you know, um, when you first mentioned to me last Wednesday, and our parliamentary advisor, that they're putting a bond on new wharves, new facilities, I thought, well, nothing wrong with that, because it has to fund the removal of them at the end of their life. But you then very quickly pointed out that in Europe there's a completely different attitude towards this. These assets don't just die when the mine dies; they flourish in serving the whole community. And so what you're saying is you need to look beyond the short term and look to the long term and the regional interests. So, and by the way, let me point out to people, and also to you might know this, Stuart, but just in case, every coal mine that is an open cut coal mine, a surface coal mine, the land that's disturbed every year to enable the advance of the mine and the uncovering of the coal seam, every acre or every hectare requires a bond to be paid for reclamation, and the company does not get that bond back until the reclamation is done. Okay, but there's no such bond on wind turbines and solar panels, so they're going to walk away from them and abandon them. And what's more, the life of a solar panel and a wind turbine is now around about 12 to 15 years, at the most 15 years. So what we're going to have is a lot of stranded assets, but they're green assets, Stuart. What you've got is going beyond the bond. You've got a port that will stay in operation for the community, for the region, and for the country, and it will have minimal impact on the environment. So what you're doing is actually upgrading the environment, because with minimal impact on the environment, people will have less impact themselves, because they'll be able to use a port that is close to them. Now, you and I don't believe this bullshit about carbon dioxide being bad. We know the data is not showing that, but wouldn't you save a hell of a lot of carbon dioxide, for those who believe that we have to cut it, if you eliminate a lot of the road transport and put it on these efficient boats?
Absolutely. I've been pushing the coastal roll-off system for some time. The Europeans, and this is just astounding figures. The Europeans started the Motorways of the Sea project probably 25 years ago. And within 2 years, they eliminated 60% of the trucks off of the coastal road. Now, at the moment in Australia, we kill 1,300 people a year on the roads. We seriously injure 18,000 people a year. And then we blocking the highways with congestion. The trucks are causing R&M, huge R&M, and the huge emissions. And trucks are the main culprit. But all of these road issues cost, it's 50 billion a year. Now, if we copied the
Yep,
Motorways of the
50
Sea,
billion a year.
50 billion a year. You check with abstats, road deaths, road accidents, road emissions, road maintenance, and road congestion. You will check the total cost of these. I'm happy to send anyone the slides and the videos that we've done on this. And if you say, well, okay, if we take 60% of the, or even 50% of the trucks off the road, would we reduce those road deaths? Yes, we'd reduce them by 650 a year. We'd reduce the road serious accidents by 9,000 a year, but we've reduced the cost by at least 25 billion. Now, I've been peddling this Motorways of the Sea message federally and state-wise, and even in Queensland, we keep having these eternal coastal shipping reviews. And they all say, yes, yes, we should do this because we save an enormous amount of exhaust emissions, truck exhaust emissions, if we put everything on the water. We can reduce the exhaust emissions on a normal coastal ship. We'd reduce the road emissions by 96%. So we've got all the figures. And you say, well, this is a no-brainer. Why are we not doing this? Because the Greens are not interested actually in the environment. They're interested in obstruction. And we've gone to them and say, look, I've asked Senator Janet Rice, look, I'm happy to come in, because she's the Green spokesperson for shipping. Said, I'm happy to come and go through all these numbers because we have to have coastal shipping. Oh, but that'll mean dredging, and that'll mean you might damage the seagrass, and et cetera, all this sort of nonsense. And this is actually part of their psyche.
So what the Green psyche and their ideology is to shut down everything. That's what they want.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
what you're saying
nothing to do with it.
What you're saying is we would save a lot of money, which is benefit to the end user, the customer, which is the citizens of Australia. We would save a lot of pollution, real pollution, diesel fumes. I'm not talking about carbon dioxide. But for those who are interested in this rubbish about carbon dioxide, we would also cut back on that dramatically, 96%, which is almost 100%. And then we would cut down on the congestion on the roads. We would improve the safety on the roads. We would improve the commercial aspects of transport around our country. Now, we're sitting in the largest island in the world, and we do not have a shipping industry, even though we're an island. And the United States has the Jones Act, I believe, which requires that anybody involved in maritime transport within the waters of the United States must be a registered American company. It must employ Americans, and it must use ships that are built by Americans. That's what I understand. Now, we had some time ago a vigorous coastal shipping setup, but as I understand it, Stewart, correct me if I'm wrong, and I mean that sincerely, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the major things that led to the downfall of our maritime shipping, coastal maritime shipping in this country, was the stranglehold that the Maritime Union of Australia had, and they exploited that and used it to leverage power, and the governments got rid of it. That's as I understand it. Am I right or wrong, and what are the real causes of the decline of our maritime shipping?
Well, the MUA, which was the SUA in those days, Seamen's Union, the MUA certainly were a large contributing factor because they were demanding more and more pay for less and less work and better conditions. And the coastal ships that we have at the moment, some of them are still foreign crew, but they're being paid Australian wages, such as the CSL ships around the coast. And they would rather pay Ukrainians Australian wages because they actually work. Whereas the MUA guys don't work. You just have to look at the ships when they do operate them, the rusty old terrible things, and the crew just let go of the lines and tie them up. They don't do anything else. So they're a bit of a disgrace. The second reason was that the Australian National Line, and I worked for them 3 years before I started my company here in Queensland. I worked for 3 years and 3 days, and it took me 3 lots of exorcism to get it out of the system because it was controlled by the feds. And we just had this nonsense coming out of Canberra all the time, just doing stupid things. Because we were owned by the government, we were controlled by bureaucrats that had no idea what ships were really about. And then the third thing was that as we started to enlarge various docks, such as Webb Dock in Melbourne, the Greens started to play, oh, no, you can't do this because this is a sensitive habitat of the hairy-chested nutscratcher or some crazy thing like this. and they would stop it. And I used to think they were joking. but it was, and they would stop a project for years. And they have grown in power and in influence and legality. And a lot of the states in Australia, the EPA is autonomous. In other words, the minister cannot interfere. So, and we're getting some, we're seeing some horrible things right around the country, and everyone's telling the same, oh, we can't get dredging permits, we can't get this. Why not? Well, because when they want an offset, or what they want, you're talking about it before, a vegetation offset. So if you want a dredging permit, they say, well, you give us $5 million as a vegetation offset, and we'll let you dredge. This is just dreadful.
So
Most
shakedown
small
money.
companies, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
so let me clarify that. You've got well, first of all, ANL, was that a federal government entity?
It was a federal government entity, yes.
Okay, well now I
So,
understand why, because I've rarely seen, in fact, I can't recall anywhere where businesses or an industry has failed because of the union alone. Sometimes union bosses get it into their head that they want to control things. They get a stranglehold. They're thumping their chests about all the power they have. They extract various things, mainly for themselves, not for the workers. So that's one thing, but you don't get that without shoddy management, and that now I understand why the shoddy management. But you also had the crippling from the Greens requirements for shakedown money
yes,
for their, and that's what it's all about, shakedown money. So
yes,
so can you tell us something now? I agree with you. We need, and I've been raising this in the Senate. We need a coastal shipping sector in this country for all the reasons you just mentioned. It just makes so much sense. But one thing you haven't mentioned, and that is security. Coastal shipping, we're an island nation that requires movement of goods around our country, and the coastal shipping not only would be cheaper, it would give us enormous security, because currently what would happen in a war is the boats that ply around our sea, around our coast, would all leave and go home, and be stuck in a war with nothing. So could you tell us a bit more about the three aspects of your sea transport business, and then we'll talk about some of the other work you've been doing?
well, just on the security aspects, the ship that's behind me, just behind my head here, is one that we're doing as amphibious warfare craft for the Army. And we've been working very closely with the Defense Department on developing some of these projects. But I was explaining to Corey Bernardi on Sky last year when Albanese, before he was elected, he promised to bring 10 ships, oh, sorry, 12 ships onto the coast. And of course, Corey said to me, well, do we need 12 ships? I said, actually, we don't. Yes, we need probably closer to 150 ships, but we need the ports first. Because at the moment, we don't have the ports because the Greens have been playing the long game. And for the last 50 years, as I was talking about, there's no way we get a big port anywhere in Queensland, but they've stopped us even doing a mini port, a small port. And I'll give you an example, Malcolm. In UK, they have a port every 65 kilometers, which helped defend that nation through 2 world wars.
Yep.
In Gujarat, India, they have a port every 53 kilometers. In Queensland, we have a port every 700 kilometers. Okay.
So what was Gujarat
So
again, the state in India?
53, every 53 kilometers.
So
And
so
we did some work for the Indian Navy, so that's how I know that.
so the parliamentary advisor and I that were with you last Wednesday in your offices, when you mentioned, imagine a port every 150 kilometers around our coast, we looked at each other and went, what the hell would that do to opening up our whole state, including inland
That's
Queensland?
correct.
It would be
And that's
huge.
what,
It would be huge for regional manufacturing. It would be huge for regional agriculture. Huge for regional metals production, energy production. And we're not talking about a massive environmental footprint. You'd actually have reduced environmental footprint because it's spread around and clean. I've got to say this. You know, I worked as a mine manager in the Hunter Valley. And one of my postings was to a mine on the coastline, and I had responsibility for a coal preparation plant that cleans the coal, and also loads it onto a ship, which then took the coal to Newcastle Harbour and unloaded it there, and Stuart's boat. So I've got some experience in this, and I saw Stuart's boats and designs. He's got models, he's got pictures, he's got concepts, he's got working photos of working vessels from around the world. And the thing I loved about your vessels, Stuart, was that they're inherently simple and elegant. Always, when I look for a design, I look at whether or not it's simple and elegant, and yours are. And I could see that the innovations you've introduced, I mean, a bucket wheel excavator to bucket wheel reclaimer on board a ship, the facilities for getting into the ship through the rear of the boat, and also your attention to detail in terms of keeping all the dust enclosed, because when you move minerals, you get dust. But you keep them all enclosed, and then you have a filter system, which means that there's nothing gets into the ocean, nothing gets into the air. I mean, that is just phenomenal. And it all enables very low cost and high efficiency. So I want to compliment you on that for a start, but I want to reassure the viewers that I've scrutinized what you've done, and it is beautiful. It's very, very beautiful, and that's why it works.
Well, Malcolm, Sea Transport has won 10 international awards, 5 of which were environmental awards. And Neil Baird, the marine publisher, described me once as a practicing greenie, which was a term that made me squirm. So, but when
Okay.
I go to when I go to these meetings, I said, "Look, we've got pieces of paper on the wall, nice certificates, environmental awards, and the people we're usually arguing with from the EPA, they have done nothing and just continue to obstruct, nothing to do with the environment."
So you've got a phenomenal concept here. Well, no. You've got a phenomenal, proven concept that works. It
That's
minimizes
correct.
impact on the environment, maximizes returns for the country, minimizes costs for consumers, which are all Australians, maximizes the effect for small business, maximizes the effect for regional Australia. And your biggest frustration is the lies of the Greens and the
Yes,
Palaszczuk government in Queensland, which is throttling you with a piece of legislation that was designed to cut you out.
that's
So
correct.
that just shows the shoddy governance in this country, the dishonest, deceitful governance. But we've got a
Yes,
beautiful concept now that is proven.
yes.
Quickly, sea transport. What are the 3 areas you focus on? And then
We're focusing on
I'd like to get you to tell us about your visions for Australia,
we're
and
focusing
then
on
your
ferries,
website.
roll on, roll off ferries. We focus on military, and we're focusing on transshippers. And we see that the transshippers hold the biggest potential for Australia because we can get exports, as we've been discussing, from all of the remote trapped commodities around this nation if we can get the mini port strategy implemented. So
You also design ships for
yes,
construction anywhere in the world. So your products are in operation around the world.
we're in
You
47 countries at the moment. We've got all of our we're I marketed to 70 countries 10 times, but I've actually sold to 47 countries. And hence I can do videos such as sea level rises because we are an authority on sea level rises. And my 2 minute 30-second video um, where I address Mr. Gore and Miss Greta Thunberg. So, and you can't dispute that. So,
No, and I've got to give you full credit. You're a small business. How many? You employ what? 30 people, roughly.
well, now people ask me the other way, Malcolm, how many people work for me?
How many people work for you?
About half of them.
That was a
No,
setup.
there's, yes, there's about 30 here, but essentially what we do is with our licensed builders, we create hundreds of jobs. We're dealing with BAE at the moment with these amphibious craft. That's
A
going to create
British
hundreds of,
aircraft.
yeah, these are the submarine builders, but they've got their hand up to use our designs and they're discussing with us a license to build these things in Australia. So
Wow,
that'll
wow.
create lots of jobs.
That's a very good answer. So you employ around about 30 people directly, but you drive the employment of many, many, many more here, and potentially even more here in the future. So,
That's correct.
website, what's your website, Stuart?
Oh, good question. It's just C Transport, www.c Transport. My political opinions, if people
.com
want to
only, isn't
look
it?
at those,
.com?
.com, yeah,
Yeah,
ctransport.com.
www.ctransport.com, yes.
My external stuff, which I don't attach to the company, I attach to the MTG, Marine Therapy Group, and this is promoting small businesses and this nation. I usually do the columns, and if you look at Stewart Ballantyne Spectator, you'll see the columns there. And we put out the videos at the same time through the MTG. But I'm not sure of that YouTube address. I'll find it for you, Malcolm.
Okay, well, it'll be too late for this podcast, but that's fine. I know that if you search go to YouTube and search MTG Stewart Ballantyne, Stuart Ballantyne, then you'll find plenty of videos from Stewart. The other thing is that the number one resource is Stewart Ballantyne Spectator magazine. You're not on social media, and your articles published by the Spectator at that area there. So very quickly, we've only got 3 minutes left. What would you mentioned Project Iron Boomerang, energy using what we have, coastal roll-on, roll-off you've already mentioned. Just tell us a little bit about each of those three in a minute each. That's all we've got, Stuart.
Well, in energy, I don't believe that we should be importing our energy solutions, such as wind turbines and solar panels. We should be using actually what's under our feet, the uranium, and we've done videos on that. I'm happy to send them to you. The uranium, thorium, the gas, coal. I mean, we are, as I say, it's idiotic that we're ignoring this. We should be, Iron Boomerang is an excellent one. We should be producing our own steel and to certainly join up the coal of Queensland to the iron ore of West Australia and have a steel mill on either side. The Shane Condon's concept is excellent. It's a nation building exercise, which we should have been addressing years ago. And we are not prepared for war. If you look at the last one, Essington Lewis said we have to focus on steel and aluminium production because there is a war coming. And luckily for him, the Prime Minister at the time listened to him. And we were a little bit prepared. At the moment, we're not prepared.
No, just to tell the viewers what Iron Boomerang is about, we've got the world's best coking coal in the east around central Queensland, around Mackay, Moranbah. And we've also got some massive steel iron ore deposits in the west. Iron Boomerang is a steel railway line between the two, so the trains would take iron ore from the west to the coalfields in the east, to steel mills that would be built there. And there's already strong interest in that from international steel mills and Australian operators. And then the reverse journey would go back, the Boomerang would go back carrying coal. So you would have a dramatic reduction in rail freight, a dramatic reduction in ocean transport and the carbon dioxide from taking empty vessels and empty trains one way around the world. And you would have dramatic opening up of the inland of this country and development of that. Security, also the Aboriginal communities, remote communities would have water, communications, internet, and so on. Last one.
Yes.
Got half a minute. Coastal roll-on, roll-off, unused blue highway. That's what you want.
Unused blue highway. We don't have to pothole this place. It will reduce road accidents and road deaths. It's a no-brainer. My father-in-law was hit by a truck just on his retirement. And for 13 years, we had to push him around in a wheelchair because road accidents are actually a bigger cost than road deaths. When you see there's 18,000 serious accidents a year, road accidents, mostly on the perimeter road. If we could get rid of that, that's a terrific thing.
Thank you so much, Stuart. You've really covered it very, very well and raised a few things I didn't know. So thank you so much. Until our next show, this is Senator Malcolm Roberts, staunchly pro-human, proud of who we are as humans, and a believer in the inherent goodness and care in human beings. I want to acknowledge the pain and then take a minute to appreciate the abundance and potential in and around all of us. There is pain associated with humans. I acknowledge that, but appreciate the abundance and potential in and around all of us. Please remember to listen to people, to love people, and to love one another. Thank you so much, Stewart Ballantyne.